'Cause like a winter tonight, I thought I would always have light. The quick flash that you gave to me, so dark I could barely see. Looking
From wherever you are around the world, welcome and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be exploring the world of the Jewish Mafia. That's right. No, it's not Italian. It's the Jewish Mafia. With us today is Dr. Robert Rockaway. He is the author of a wonderful book called But He Was Good to His Mother, The Lives and Crimes of Jewish Gangsters. He's a retired professor of Tel Aviv University. Let's welcome him to the circle. Welcome, Dr. Rockaway.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Now, we talked off camera for a few minutes, and you brought up a very fascinating story. The title, by the way, is amazing. It's a great title. How did you get to this title?
Well, as I mentioned before, I was visiting my parents, and I was speaking to my mother about I had just gotten an FBI file on a gangster whose family, my family, knew when I was a child, and my grandfather had peddled, was a peddler, immigrant, with the father of 3 gangsters in the Purple Gang in Detroit. And I talked to her about this Harry Fleischer. I said, Mom, you know what he was? He was this sleazeball. He was this, he was that. She listened to me, and she looked at me, she says, you know, that may be true, but he was always good to his mother. And so that's such a typical Jewish mother response. Guy could have been a sleazeball and a killer, but he was good to his mother. That's what counts, right? So I said, Mom, that's the title of the book. He was good, but he was good to his mother. So that's how the title ended up there.
It's an amazing book because you actually spoke to most of these individuals in person,
right,
in their older years, of course. Most of them were in prison, I'm assuming?
Many of them were. One man, Putty Hinkus, he got the name Putty because when he was little, he couldn't pronounce the word pudding. He said, I want puddy, I want puddy. They even got that name on the FBI file for this guy. And he was an associate of Abner Longies Willman, who was the Jewish mobster in New Jersey, controlled Newark. No one ran for governor or mayor when he was around without an okay from him. And at any rate, I interviewed these people, and it was fascinating. It was, and you know, they were in their late 80s, early 90s. And when they spoke to me, they projected back, you're a behavioralist, they projected themselves back in time when they were young and tough. And they told things like, you know, and I'm sitting there tape recording them, and you can hear me on the tapes giggling because they would say something like this, why did you kill so-and-so? Because he shouldn't have been there, you know, this kind of stuff. And then they talked about things that you couldn't read in the newspapers about Polly Adler and other people, and it was fascinating. It was a part of history that's part of American history and American Jewish history, except the intimate side is not, because they didn't talk to reporters then. But when I interviewed them, they just opened up and they spoke to one another, and they would tell me things. How can I verify it? How can I verify what X said to Y in a room? And so I can't. So I would quote them, but wherever I could, I would verify some of the things they told me, either newspaper articles about a killing, a robbery, a hijacking, a kidnapping, extortion, or something like that. It was fascinating stuff, and I interviewed some very well-known people, including Meyer Lansky, who was an associate of Lucky Luciano and Frank Costello and Vito Genovese and these men in the 1920s and 1930s.
So they crossed over, the Jewish and the Italian Mafia, a little bit?
Yeah, it was a generation of them worked together, and they all of the big ones were once the pupils and worked for a man called Arnold Rothstein. Been a lot written about him. He was supposedly the man who fixed the 1919 World Series between the Chicago White Sox and Cincinnati Reds, and Chicago was supposed to have won, and they lost. Say it ain't so, Joe, and all that kind of. They made movies about it, written about it. At any rate, he was called the Big Bankroll, the Brain, because he never spent a day in jail. And he came from a wealthy family, New York family. Father was a clothing manufacturer. He certainly didn't have to go into crime, but it attracted him. Gambling. He was basically a gambler. And he hired or invited to work for him tough young mobsters, or I won't say thugs, but who were on their way up and were willing to do what they had to do. And he said something very interesting to them, and this was told to me by a number of people. He said, you, Lucky Luciano, Costello, these others, and Meyer Lansky and Longy Zwillman and Lepke Buchhalter, they all worked for him. He said, you know, money has no ethnicity and it has no religion. If you work together, you can all make money. He said, don't fight with each other. Just work together and everyone can benefit. And some of them took his lesson to heart. Meyer Lansky did. He worked with these people. He gave them what was their due. And he lived a modest life. And he survived to an old age. He died of cancer. A number of them did. Some didn't. Lepke Buchhalter died in the electric chair. Longy Zwillman supposedly committed suicide, but I have excellent information. Oh, pardon.
I know when I've done research on gangs, I've done research on others, there is a certain code of ethics that they possess as well. Even the prisoners in jail, or prison, I guess, they have some code of ethics. And it's funny that the mafia has their own code of ethics as well.
Right. Well, you know, the mafia, the real mafia can only be Sicilians. Al Capone was not mafia. It's just a term that's adopted, you know, the Russian mafia. It's become a generic term. But basically the mafia, the original mafia, and in the United States, only Sicilians could be members of the mafia. If you were born in northern Italy or something, you could be a gangster and have a gang and all like Capone did, but you couldn't be a member of the mafia. Only Sicilians could be members. That was our thing, Cosa Nostra, our thing. So, and the Jewish mafia wasn't really a mafia. There were Jewish gangs that controlled crime in the 20s and 30s in Philadelphia, Newark, New Jersey, Detroit, Michigan, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Cleveland, Ohio. Part of the time they worked with the Italians, other times they didn't work with the Italians. But they were very prominent and ran things, and in Las Vegas as well, later on. So they were very prominent. Their period basically was the 20s and 30s into the 40s, and then by the 50s it was pretty much over. It was one generation.
Hello, my name's Matt, and I'm an addict.
My mom was addicted to prescription pills when I was very young, before I even turned 1.
Are you or someone you know struggling with alcohol or drug addiction? Has everyone given up on you or your loved one? The caring staff at Elite Care understands and treats you as a whole person. We offer individual and group therapy, holistic healing such as yoga, nutrition, and spirituality, medication management, and PTSD treatment. By building upon your strengths and rebuilding broken bonds, we help you begin a successful life. With our staff of licensed psychotherapists and doctors, you can be assured of the highest level of care. Elite Care is the best option for long-term rehabilitation from drugs and alcohol. Contact 888-511-0607 for more information.
I want to go back to what you were discussing earlier, because this is one of the nice things about your book that makes it unique is you actually explored their behavior. And one of the comments that we talked about was you asked them why they did it, and you also asked them if they felt any remorse. But I guess the first question is, why did they do it?
Okay. None of the men I interviewed, and they were really sweet. They were grandfathers. I mean, they're elderly guys, you know. Half of them could hardly walk and things like this. They didn't finish high school.
None of them?
They were not none of them.
Wow.
They were not educated in a formal sense. Now, you want the good life. I mean, you know about this, gangs. You want the good life. You want money. You want beautiful girlfriends. You want a fancy house. You want nice cars, beautiful clothes. You want to be somebody. You want the power. You want the recognition. How do you get that if you're uneducated and you're not interested in working in a shop or a store or a factory that was for, what's the word, suckers? Now, you want the good life. If you were tough and willing to be ready to take violence, give violence, deliver violence, and also you have to be ready to accept the violence, crime, the crooked ladder, it's called, of success. and they had money. When I interviewed them, they no longer had money. They spent it on gambling. They lost it on the races. You know, they had the high life in their 20s and 30s with thousands and thousands of dollars. This Max Hinkes I talked about, he told me he'd been to jail over 30 times, but he was well connected. So they would bring him a woman at night to stay with him. They would bring him steaks, etc. And when he left prison, he bought the warden a car, a new car. He gave everybody money. Yeah, I mean, they were quote unquote connected. Now, you mentioned the government. Sure, of course, they bribe people, police, judges. You know, they tell the story of Jake Guzik, which is a true story, that he kept suing the newspapers. They said, Jake, you're going to lose. His friend said he was Al Capone's treasurer. The only one Capone said, Jake is my best friend. And when Capone was in jail, Jake Guzik took care of his family when they were in Florida. Capone's Italian friends forgot about him when he was up in Sing Sing, or Alcatraz, but Jake Guzik did. And people would say, what are you going to sue? You're going to lose. He said, hey, listen, I spend a lot of money on these judges, and I want to get some use out of them. And they were bribed. And crime couldn't continue in the way it did unless you didn't have police on the take, judges on the take, and it existed. A man by the name of Max Hoff, his nickname was Boo Boo. And if you're interested, I'll tell you later where he got the nickname from. But his syndicate, all Jewish syndicate, in the 20s controlled crime in Philadelphia. They had a grand jury investigation. And they find out this man controlled the police department. And his operation, his syndicate, purchased more machine guns and grenades than the Philadelphia police. And the police were on the take. I mean, they interviewed these policemen. Now, how does a policeman who's making maybe at the time, 1928, maybe $4,000 a year, where does he get $100,000 in his bank account? One policeman said he makes bird cages for the trade, the retail trade. They came up with all kinds of things, you know. They were all on the take. They were working for him. Longy's Woolman in New Jersey. How did he manage to get all this liquor in? Because the police acted as guards while they were bringing this stuff in, and he paid them off. So, wow. I mean, we're connected. Yeah, we can't be naive about this. Crime exists. You can chase after these people, but it existed, and in many places it still does exist because people are on the take. I mean, you know, you're not naive about it, so neither am I. So.
Now, you asked them, too, do they feel remorse? And that was an interesting answer you gave me on that.
Okay. I asked them all, are you sorry for what you did? None of them said they were sorry for what they did, but they were all sorry, all of them said that they brought shame on their family. That didn't stop them from doing what they were doing, but they felt that they had shamed the family. And this bothered them even in their old age. When I mean old age, these are men in their late 80s and some of them even early 90s I interviewed. They still had that sense that they had shamed the family. But none of them said that they were sorry for what they did. Now, do I believe what they say? Someone says something to you? Yes, no, whatever. I mean, you can take it with a grain of salt or something. They're talking to this professor from Israel. Maybe they're trying to impress me or anything like this, trying to tell me things maybe they think I want to hear. But, you know, I interviewed them more than once, and we had fun. I mean, as I said, you could hear me on the tape giggling and laughing at their stories. I mean, it was, you know, a couple of days with these guys, and it was terrific. I have to accept what they say because they continue doing what they did to make a living, quote unquote. And not all of them came from poverty or poor families. Most of them came from working class families where the father was working. They weren't wealthy, but they weren't poverty stricken. There was always food on the table. There was always a roof over their heads. They had the basics. Some of them came from wealthy families. Arnold Rothstein came from a wealthy family. Charlie Solomon in Boston, who controlled crime, the drug traffic, prostitution in Boston. He, in the Northeast, the drug traffic, etc., he came from a family that owned movie theaters. And he didn't have to do what he did, but it attracted him, and he did. I mean, not all of them were poverty-stricken boys. They were attracted by this life, which they found more, I don't want to say fun, but more remunerative, and gave them a certain status that they probably wouldn't have had if they would have followed another kind of occupation. So,
Yeah, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left here.
okay.
I definitely want to find out why his name is Boo Boo. We have
Okay.
a couple other questions too, but why did they call him Boo Boo?
Why Boo-Boo? His mother, when she called him to come home and eat, she would use the Yiddishized Hebrew term for come, bo, come. Well, his Irish and Italian friends or whatever as a kid, they didn't know what bo meant, and they would call him Boo-Boo. So that stuck. It's also on the FBI files. Max, quotation marks around Boo-Boo Hoff, Hoff. Now, many of them, once Prohibition ended, they couldn't make an honest living. They didn't know how to make an honest. They had money. They invested in bowling alleys or restaurants or things like that, many of them. They lost their money. Some of the clever ones invested in real estate, La Costa, California, and half of the campus of Las Vegas, the University of Las Vegas. Mo Dalitz, who was a prominent figure during Prohibition in Cleveland, invested his money well. Some of the others invested their money well in Florida and other places in real estate. So in their old age, they had a decent income. They didn't have to do what they did in the 20s and 30s. But a lot of them just blew the money away. They didn't hang on to anything, didn't invest anything, had the high life, drinking and women and all this stuff. And so they didn't die very wealthy, put it that way.
Last question for you today, Dr. Rockaway. Fascinating topic, really fascinating. This only touches the tip of the iceberg, but the last question for you is our fastball question. Are you ready, sir?
Yes, I am.
What name would you have been called if you were part of the Jewish Mafia?
Oh, brother, probably Rock, R-O-C-K, which was my nickname when I played ball. The Rock is at bat. Give it to the Rock, he'll carry it. I still used it. Friends of mine, hey, it's Rock, R-O-C-K. Leaving off the A-W-A-Y half. Probably the Rock.
That's a lot better than Boo Boo.
Yep. Sounds tough, right? The Rock. Stone.
Once again, thank you.
It's
Sorry?
a slang American term for crazy.
Wait, what is?
That's why Ben Siegel got the name Bugsy. When he got upset, his eyes flashed, his face got red, his ears were probably ringing, and they called him, he's Bugs. But you never wanted to say it to his face. He'd kill you.
Thanks again, Dr. Robert Rockaway.
Good talking to you. Stay
Here's
well.
the author of the book, But He Was Good to His Mother, The Lives and Crimes of Jewish Gangsters. Thank you, everyone, for joining us as well. Remember, our motto is simple. Wherever there's psychology involved, even with the Jewish Mafia, we are there. We'll see you next time, everyone.